So let's take a look at our Suburban High School example project. So here we have a project where we have big important entryway, we've got admin space and classroom space, some presumably big corridor that kind of connects everything. That corridor probably reaches across. This is a 2-story classroom space, making a courtyard, a couple other courtyards. We've got a big important spaces like cafeterias and multipurpose spaces, theaters, things like that. And then we have a big long span gymnasium of some sort. So fairly straightforward idea of how a high school might work. We've got, parking areas and play fields, all of that stuff. So from a code standpoint, what would be the things that would jump out at you? Like, how would you start thinking about these things as you go along? First thing that comes to mind is going to be fire ratings and egress. So what are the fire ratings issues? Well, the fire ratings issues are going to be that in order to create an egress path, all the corridors are going to have to be at a certain level of rating. What that rating is, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hour, it would be dependent on the size of the building, a little bit on the municipality, because slightly different takes on this idea will be done by different folks. But another thing that would make it, might alter that would be the idea whether it was sprinklered or not. If it's a sprinklered building, you might be able to reduce how much fire rating you would need on something. So this idea of kind of understanding the fire ratings very quickly gets into not just what the building is and how big it is, but also some of the detail decisions. Would it be more expensive to add the sprinkler system, or more expensive to make all the walls 3-hour walls or something like that? So you're thinking about the actual use by the people, and you're thinking about the cost structure and trying to sort of marry these things together in some logical way. So the corridors are going to be at a very specific fire rating level. The stairs and the elevators will be at a very specific fire rating level because we want to make those especially safe. So they would be at least as fire rated as the corridor system would be, probably 1 notch higher. In a building like this, there would very likely be sort of separations into different buildings. So you might have 2 or 3 or even 4 different buildings, and what that's saying is obviously it's all one building and it's one project, but this space for the gymnasium, that's a very different kind of space than the rest of the spaces, and it's going to have different kinds of events in it. It's going to have assembly events where there's lots of people, and there's going to be assembly events where things are happening, and maybe a concert's playing or something, right? So lots of things could be going on in there, and it's hard to know exactly what might be happening in there. You wouldn't really want that space to just sort of flow into a set of offices or some classroom spaces or something. There would need to be some ability to have that be a separate space. So my guess is that the gymnasium is effectively its own building, the way it's been designed here. Now there'd be situations where that's not true, and you'd find ways to sort of fit into the code in other examples. But in a situation like this, where there's a clear definition, you can see where that building is. The doors and the walls between those 2 spaces, right in that zone, are just going to be at a very particular fire rating in order to divide those spaces out. So these become their own buildings within the larger building. And then if this is its own building, it has to have egress in some logical way that can get everybody out. As we just said, it's an assembly space, so it's going to have even more egress than any of the other parts of the building. So that's one building. The multi-purpose in the cafeteria, that's probably another sort of individual building within the overall building. And then just because we have these 2 big wings, there's probably a likelihood that the admin and classroom space here would be considered one building, and then the 2-story one would be considered its own other building. So there's going to be egress issues and fire rating issues that are going to separate out within these different buildings. So with a school, clearly those are going to be the big issues. You might find it surprising, but we don't like it when our schools burn down, right? It's a problem. People will be very worried about it. So the codes are very particular about these kinds of issues. But there's a lot of other issues you'd have to be thinking about. This is a public use, so all the ADA spaces you'd have to be thinking about. What are the doors like? Is there a no-step entry everywhere? Do the doors have enough room around them that somebody can maneuver? Are the bathrooms set up in such a way that somebody in a wheelchair or somebody with a walker or cane or something could get through and get to every space? So there's a lot of those kinds of issues that could really drive a lot of the design thinking here. The way that the code mostly in most parts of the country is being reviewed these days, that really means that even all the sports equipment, you need to have access for as many people, many ability types as possible. So this is a pretty big impact on school design. One of the ways that people think about this, and we'll talk about this in another location, is the difference between accessible design and universal design. And so this would be one of those spots where you'd be trying to bring in universal design issues, which is the idea that everybody should be able to use as many aspects of the building as possible. And then there's lots of other sort of code issues, right? I mean, this is a lot of people. There's a lot of different types of uses. So, for example, how many bathrooms are there? How would you figure that out? Well, you might have a reason from the client may have a very particular desire to have a certain number because they want to maybe spread them out so the kids aren't walking around the building all the time, that they have lots of places for people to go to the bathroom. Or maybe they don't like that. Maybe they want to have really strict control over how it's going to work and they want to bunch them together. But the sheer number is going to be a code issue, and that's going to be based on the number of expected students, the population of the building. And that would be the case in any scenario. It would be the population of the building that would be based on a square footage number, or possibly based on an actual number if you could sort of show that, no, it doesn't really matter what the square footage number says, this is the real number that's going to be used. The reason that can be sometimes hard, that usually the code officials want you to base these things on occupancy square foot, is because, well, that's you, but what happens 5 years from now when this becomes a charter school or something? It's a different school, but the building is there and they jam more people in or something like that. So all of those kinds of ideas, those are all going to be code related. Can people get out in an emergency? Do they need to be able to get out the windows or the regular door egress systems? What about code issues in terms of the structure? Well, there's going to be a very strong concern about the long spans for that big open space. And then there's going to be other concerns sort of generally, but those will fall mostly into sort of typical structure and typical fire rating issues. But for that long span, there'd definitely be a lot of concern about that. What about civil, right? How is the parking lot going to work? How is the driveway going to work? It has to fit into all of those sort of normal rules and regulations, zoning codes and all of that. So there's a whole array of different issues that are going to be thought about here. You're going to start with the fire rating and egress, but it's going to go all the way through that to how big is the parking space.